And I came to New England for the Occupy New England Regional Convergence that happened last weekend in New Hampshire, and then spent the last week touring both Maine and New Hampshire. And we're scheduled to fly out crazy early out of Boston tomorrow, and we thought we had a day off, but Noor and Bill put us to work. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. And just to let you know what the format will be, again, while we're just sort of waiting on Bill to get finalized and set up, is I'm going to do about a 20 or 30 minute framing piece around sort of the big picture. Think of it as the theory or the analysis, but I hope that you'll find it instructive and helpful. Daniel will then take over and get more concrete. He'll talk about our strategy as well as some specific programs and projects that we have coming over. And that will leave us with lots of time for discussion, questions around either the analysis or around the strategy or around the program, right? So we'll have plenty of time for all of that. And even as we wait, so I'll also say that another thing that Daniel and I had the privilege of meeting with folks from Peace Action New Hampshire and the American Friends Service Committee New Hampshire and Open Democracy and others, and you know, nudge nudge wink wink, I think that we're going to be mobilizing to get ready so that in the upcoming open presidential primaries, right, still 3 years away, except for we're going to make sure that Move to Amend, corporate personhood, and money is not speech becomes the signature bird dogging campaign. We're going to make every single one of those presidential candidates confront the reality of corporate rule. Yeah, right? So I think you're taking it up a notch, as it were. Of course, you all know what Mitt Romney's position is, right, on corporate personhood.
Corporations are people, aren't they?
No, what did he say?
Corporations are people.
My friend?
My friend.
Who heard that? So, do you know why you know Mitt Romney's position? Because a Move to Amend supporter came to an event like this and 6 weeks later cornered Mitt Romney at the Iowa State Fair with that question, and then using the same thing that Peter's got in his hand, nothing more than a video recording device on a cell phone, just hit record and then uploaded it onto YouTube. It was citizen journalism at its best, and that was just when we were just getting started. Imagine now with a 2-year runway, a window of actually organizing people and using political theater and using polar bears to represent the climate crisis and using people in costumes representing both the prison industrial complex and the corporate connections there. Imagine using really good theater for such a campaign where we force candidates who are seeking our votes to confront and answer the question, do you believe corporations have constitutional rights? Do you believe that money is speech? If not, then why aren't you supporting Move to Amend? Mm-hmm. Right? So
Did you see the clip of Mark Provost? He's a friend of mine. Some of these folks in here might know him too. He was really big in Occupy New Hampshire, but he asked, it's a really good clip if you haven't seen it, of him asking Mitt Romney if he would change his, he gave a list of like ways that corporations, you know, abuse people. And he said, given all this, would you change your statement that corporations are people to corporations are abusive people? It's an
nice.
awesome clip.
I will take a look at it.
Yeah.
I will take a look at it. So again, we are, well, you let us know when we're ready. Okay. Howdy folks, my name is David Cobb. I am with the Move to Amend Coalition. My colleague Daniel Lee, also with the Move to Amend Coalition. We're going to be spending about 90 minutes together, and I hope that you'll find those 90 minutes not only to be informative, but also inspirational, and I mean that to inspire you to action. The way I like to start to introduce myself is that as a lawyer, I've sued corporate polluters, I've lobbied elected officials, I've run for office myself, and most importantly, as an engaged citizen, I've been arrested for nonviolent civil disobedience. In fact, when I ran for office, I said I ran on my arrest record. I've been to jail for justice. See, I think that we have to be willing to use all the tools in the toolbox to create the systemic social change we so desperately need and so richly deserve. And to do that, we need a theory, we need a strategy, and we need a plan, and then we need to act on that plan, right? And so what we're going to do in our time together is to go through that process. But to start with the process, since we're talking about the need for systemic transformational change, we're going to actually talk about the political and the legal system. I want to ask you then, what is the supreme law of the land? What is the document that is supposed to provide the framework for the entire political legal system in the United States of America?
Constitution and
The U.S. Constitution. How many of y'all have read the U.S. Constitution? Oh, good. A lot of hands go up. So y'all grade my papers. See if I get this right. I will tell you, when you read the U.S. Constitution in its entirety, not just reading individual words, but as my mama taught me to do, son, look for patterns. Look for a system. Look to try to figure out how things relate to each other. So that's actually where reality will expose itself, is how things are in relation to other things. When you look at the Constitution that way, I will submit, in the broad picture, you'll see two actors. The first actor is the most important actor. In fact, it's so important it's the first three words.
We the people.
We the people. Those are hallowed words in this country, and they should be. See, we the people come together to create the second actor, which is government itself. Saying it this way, we the people create government. Government is dependent on we the people. In fact, I like how some of my colleagues in Occupy say it. The people should never be afraid of the government, they say. In fact, government should be
Afraid of the people.
afraid of the people. How many of y'all believe the government is afraid of we the people today?
Well, yes, I think.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nur. Thank you, Mike. The reality is the Occupy movement itself demonstrated how afraid both the government and the ruling elite who control the government are actually afraid, because Occupy was nothing more than an intergenerational movement sparked off by young people to begin with, but it quickly became intergenerational. It swept across the country, and you know what was happening there? Ordinary people were having conversation with one another about, why is it like this? Why does 1% control 99% of us? And it doesn't have to be this way. What was happening there, my friends? Nonviolent revolutionary ethics were being developed. Something powerful and profound and magic was happening there. And you know what? It doesn't give me any great privilege or pleasure to tell you this, but the Obama administration, through the Department of Homeland Security, worked with the leadership of the Democratic and Republican parties, governors and mayors across this country of both political parties, and devised and designed a systemic campaign to disrupt and ultimately dismantle those Occupy encampments and to try to destroy the Occupy movement. Doesn't make me happy to say it, but that's true. And if you don't believe me, go and look it up. Freedom of Information Act requests actually prove that this is true. And see, they were afraid. Government and the ruling elite were afraid of what was happening. And I wish I could talk to them sometimes and say, don't be afraid. We're a peaceful movement. But even more than that, you are going to like the world that we're going to create. And even if at this moment you're so addicted to power, you know, the crack pipe of power that they're on, and this greed disease they have of just accumulating stuff and destroying the planet, trying to feed that disease, at the end of the day, I would like to tell them, you shouldn't be afraid of us. And even if you're not prepared for what we're about to do, your children and grandchildren are going to thank us. They're going to be thankful that we collectively worked an intervention on your addicted ass. Because that's actually what we got to do. We got to understand that the ruling elite and these people, the real 1%, the ones who are in such control of everything, it's not that they're bad people, but they're damaged. They need help. And instead of getting them help, we put them in charge. That's our fault. So we need to do a movement that can actually affect that intervention that's so necessary. But I want to get back to my constitutional framework, because in the U.S. Constitution, we the people are described and understood to be free and sovereign. And what does the word sovereign mean in this context? The authority to rule. See, the king isn't the sovereign. We kicked his butt out. But check this out. Government isn't sovereign either. Government is subordinate and accountable. Government is subordinate to whom? Why the people? Government is accountable to whom? The people. I like how this is going. Let's continue. We the people are free and sovereign because we the people have rights. Government does not have rights. Government only has duties. Saying it this way, I hope it's clear, there is a difference between rights and duties. If I have the right to do something, it means I can do it. And I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need this group's permission. I don't have to go to your city council for permission, the state legislature for permission. I don't need Congress's permission. And if any governmental agency, local, county, state, or federal government passes a law that infringes on my rights, they're wrong, not me. It is an illegitimate exercise of governmental power to interfere with any person's exercise of their inherent unalienable rights. Does that make sense? This is really important. In other words, government never has rights over the people. Government only has duties to the people. And duties, my friends, are responsibilities. And where do those governmental duties or responsibilities come from? Why, remember, all power resides with the people. As Thomas Jefferson famously said, no government is legitimate that does not derive its power from the consent of the governed. This is very important. We the people hold the power. But, pop quiz, what's the population more or less of Portsmouth, New Hampshire? 20,000. So I will celebrate that 20,000 of you hold the political power, but I'll tell you this, I don't want to go to a meeting of 20,000 people where we decide, where should stop signs go? And I like political meetings. I'm not going to that one. Can you imagine? Now somebody tell me the population more or less of the state of New Hampshire.
1,000,003.
1.3 million. You want to go to that meeting? To have state policy? Of course not. The point is, my friends, we the people do hold all the political power in whatever jurisdiction you're talking about. But in our frame of government, we the people wisely delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Do we delegate all our power to government? Hell no. We only delegate enough power for government to perform the duties that we had told them to do. And that, my friends, is what limited government even means. Government is limited in its power to perform the duties that we, the people, have told them to do. And how does government actually discharge those duties or meet their duties? They write laws in the public interest. And I want to stop for a moment to acknowledge that there is going to be debate and disagreement about what those laws should be, right? And that's okay. That's actually as it should be. That we should have a process where disagreement happens politically. And folks, I feel rather young to play the I remember when game. But I remember when you could have fierce political disagreement with somebody and still be respectful and civil in the process. I remember my daddy getting in an argument with Mr. Barrett. Now, he wasn't our next door neighbor because I grew up in the country in Texas, but he was our next property owner, right? Adjacent landowner. And I remember as a kid watching them start to fuss, and it got more heated, and I was 8 years old, a little boy, and this man that I had been taught to respect, you know, our neighbor, Mr. Berry, and Daddy were fussing, and I thought they might get into a fight at any moment, and I was trembling with, like, what's going on? And the next thing I know, Daddy and Mr. Berry are cutting it up, and Daddy says, Berry, you coot, you crazy loon, I'll see you at the feed store. And I thought to myself, what happened? What just happened? And as an adult, I think I know what happened. I think that they realized we're neighbors. My kids play with your kids. During hurricane season, you watch out for me and I watch out for you. See, I think that they had a moment of recognizing that they were in human relationship that transcended their political disagreement at that moment, and it was more important to them, and they found a way to transform it, or at least transcend it. Now, I want to be honest, these were two Texas redneck men, so in their heads they weren't thinking, I'm in human relationship with this person that transcends the importance of this moment, right? That ain't what was going on, but that's what was, it's not the words they were using, but that's what was happening. The point I'm making is to urge you and to hold me accountable to agree to disagree when we have to. And that's okay. It doesn't, and we shouldn't pretend like there's not disagreement. We should hear it out and find out where our real agreements are, where our real disagreements are, and then act accordingly. And it's all right. We don't have to exercise power over. We can learn to exercise power with, and that includes in moments where we disagree with one another. I mean, that actually is something incredibly important if we're going to have a civil society. So remember, these public laws that we just talked about, though, The public law can never violate the private rights of the people who live there. We covered that earlier. Remember, that's what civil liberties means. And now, my friends, since we've taken the time to create this framework, in one sentence, I'm going to describe to you how the U.S. constitutional framework is supposed to operate. I mean, it's a run-on sentence, but it's still just one sentence. Watch this. In the U.S. Constitution, we the people are free and sovereign because we hold all the political power. But we wisely delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Government which will be held subordinate and accountable. And we, the people, will charge government with the duty to write laws in the public interest. Local laws, state laws, and federal laws. And those laws reflect the public policy. But the one thing that no public law can ever do is to violate the private rights of the free and sovereign people who live there. Ta-da! Yeah. Isn't that brilliant? Our civil liberties are supposed to be protected, our constitutional rights are sacrosanct, but we also create a public process by which decisions are made. I think this is fantastic. I think this is beautiful. We should try that in this country. This would totally work. And I'm not joking. This is brilliant. I'm not joking. This is beautiful. And I'm also not joking. We've never tried it. Because before I go 1 second further waxing poetic about the brilliance of the U.S. Constitution, a quick time out to ask somebody to tell me, in what year does this Constitution get ratified and become the supreme law of the land? 1787 is the Constitutional Convention. But 1789 is the actual ratification date. It took 2 years after the convention to ratify it. The reason I want 1789 on the board is because that is the date that the Constitution actually comes into being, which means that's the date that the Charter of the United States Constitution is issued and the date the United States is actually born as these United States.
Isn't that also the start of the French Revolution?
Yes, how about that? And the question that I'll now ask is, in 1789, who gets to be part of we the people that can assert rights under this document? What are their characteristics?
White.
So white. So first of all, you have to be white. If you're not white, you don't get to be a person. You have to be a property owner. If you don't own property, you don't actually get to be a person who has constitutional rights. Anything else?
Be a man.
Male. That's sort of important. Right? You have to be a man. If you're not a rich, white, landowning male, you're actually not part of we the people as this framework is currently understood. In fact, you know what percentage of the adult human beings living here at the creation of the United States could actually claim that they were fully part of we the people? What percentage?
3%.
30?
30%? I often get 30%. 20%?
2%.
You are not sufficiently cynical. You're too cynical, sir. It's not 2 to 3%. It's 5%. 5%. 95% of the adult human beings living under this wonderful document were not actually covered by it or part of it. See, the problem is not in this framework. The problem is in its implementation. The concept that they used to sell the Constitution is brilliant, but its reality as implemented was racist, it was sexist, it was genocidal, it was horrific, right? Because indigenous human beings were not people. They were, in fact, subject to intentional, deliberate genocide. Africans were not people. In fact, they were enslaved in the most barbaric manner that we could even imagine. Women were not people. In fact, women couldn't even own property. Near women were property by any reasonable understanding of that word. I like how Howard Zinn said it. He said, you want to know the history of the entire United States in one sentence? It goes like this. A series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as people with rights protected by the Constitution. Now, if you want to have that fleshed out, you can read his book, The People's History of the United States, and it actually identifies all that. But in one sentence, I actually think that that's accurate. It really does chronicle the fact that it took social movements to drive actual human beings into the Constitution, to actually make it clear that that's how it operated. Yes?
But there were elements that wanted to have blacks be counted as people.
Absolutely. And they lost. And they lost. But you're right. I mean, look, famously, Dolly Madison told her husband James, and don't forget the ladies, right? I mean, I guess it's important to recognize, as you said, Herb, that there were debates about that from the beginning, but in its implementation, this is basically how the Constitution operated. And now that we've got this figured out, we might actually recognize that really the fight that we're talking about is around legal personhood. That is, in fact, what the fight around the abolitionist movement was, the women's suffrage movement was, the civil rights movement. Almost all of the great social movements in this country have been about who is a legal person, because who can assert rights. This is really important. See, legal personhood is not a technicality. It's not something that only lawyers should concern themselves with. This is at the core of whether or not we actually have a functioning democratic republic. And now that I've got this all on the board, it might behoove us to ask, well, where should the corporation go? After all, the huge transnational corporation is really the most dominant institution on planet Earth today, right? And before I put the corporation on this board, I want to ask an honest question. Does anybody know what it takes to form a corporation in New Hampshire today?
$100.
$100 application fee and some paperwork. And as long as you fill the paperwork out correctly and your $100 check clears, do you know what the Secretary of State will do? Rubber stamp it and issue you what?
Charter.
A charter. A charter. That charter is the birth certificate of that corporation. You know what you can do with your corporation under New Hampshire law? Anything legally permissible. Apparently, if you have enough money and power, you can do illegal things with it, but put that aside for a moment. You know how long your charter can last in New Hampshire?
Forever.
Forever.
As long as you pay the fee.
As long as somebody, because after you die, somebody else can pay the fee. It lives longer than a human being because it literally lives forever. Nobody here does. Now I want to take you back to 1789 and tell you what it once took to form a corporation in every state in this union. First, your application did not go to a clerk as a trivial matter. Your application went directly to the State House of Representatives, where they discussed it, debated, and voted on it, and you had to get a majority vote. And even if you got a majority vote in the State House, that's still not enough, because now your application goes to the State Senate, where they discuss it, debate it, and vote on it, and you got to get another majority vote. But that's still not enough, because now your application goes to the governor, who considers it and has to be willing to sign it. Does that sound anything like a corporate charter today?
Not so much.
Of course not. What did I just describe? What's that mechanic?
A law.
A law. Peter, I just described legislation. The point that I want you to understand is that there was a time in this country, and this was true for about 75 to 100 years in almost all of the states, the functional ability to even create a corporate charter with limited liability was the political equivalent of legislation. It was politically controlled because the concept of limited liability was understood to be a powerful privilege, not a right. A privilege. It was a privilege. And by the way, if you were granted the privilege of limited liability incorporation back then, do you know how long that privilege lasted? 5 years, 10 years. Every corporate charter was written into it a date certain by which the limited liability was to end. And if anybody wanted to continue with limited liability, you had to reapply for it at the end of that time. Oh, and by the way, if you ever did any other type of business other than the specific application, do you know what happened to your corporate charter? Revoked. Corporate charters were routinely revoked for going ultra vires, or beyond the authority of why it had been allowed to be created. And now watch this. Even if you were operating in that narrow timeline, even if you were doing the narrow thing for which you had been granted your corporate charter, see how controlled that is? If you ever did anything to violate the public interest, do you know what happened to your corporate charter? Revoked. Corporate charters were once routinely revoked for merely acting outside the public interest. I want to stop for a moment and ask you, can somebody name a single one of the Fortune 500 corporations that could even exist today with those political restrictions in place? I can wait.
Berkshire Hathaway and
None. None. I submit to you that none of the Fortune 500s could operate the way that they are now if we had the political restrictions that were once put in place in this country. Now, I'm not saying that 1789 was the land of milk and honey, because slavery existed. The patriarchy against women was real. Indigenous people were being systematically slaughtered. The working class white men were being oppressed through the economic institutions. But what I'm saying is the tool known as the limited liability corporation was politically controlled. There was lots of other bad things happening, but the corporation was not the instrument of that oppression and exploitation. Are y'all with me? See, the point is that this is our history. It's a hidden history. Most people don't know about this, but as soon as they begin to recognize that there is a way to control these behemoths and that there are tools available if we would only use them, then we can begin to get to the point where we actually use those tools appropriately. And now, my friends, that we know that it takes an action of state government to create the corporate charter, we understand that the corporate charter can be used to hold the corporation subordinate and accountable. We understand that the corporate charter describes the duties of what a corporation can and cannot do. We understand that a corporation should never be allowed to exist if it doesn't serve the public interest. Isn't it obvious that a corporation should go here so that it can be properly politically controlled? And now, my friends, thank you for your patience, because here comes the punchline. When the U.S. Supreme Court, in an act of supreme judicial activism, by the way, says notwithstanding logic, notwithstanding legal analysis, notwithstanding prior decisions, we are now going to tell you that you must treat a corporation as if it's a person, as if it were a human being with rights. It perverts the whole framework. See, corporate personhood is a shorthand for the legal doctrine created by the courts that allows a corporation to claim to be a person with constitutional rights. And if that's true, then it means corporate lawyers can go into court and overturn democratically enacted laws. Laws designed to protect our environment, laws designed to protect workers, laws designed to protect the public health and safety, laws designed to protect the integrity of the election process itself. Every one of those laws and more can and have been overturned on the basis of the illegitimate idea that concentrated capital has inherent and inalienable constitutional rights. And then, if you add that to the second, equally illegitimate, also court-created idea that money equals speech, created by the Supreme Court in Buckley versus Vallejo, you now see, I think, the linchpins. Two legal doctrines, not laws, not even individual court decisions, but entire bodies and doctrines that put together allow the ruling elite to steal our sacred right to self-government. And what pisses me off as a lawyer is that they use the legal system to legalize the theft of our sacred right to self-government and tell us, well, that's the law. It's the operation of the law. And if you're against it, then you're illegal. Well, we at Move to Amend say, ya basta. Enough already. This is crazy. This idea that a corporation has constitutional rights. It's crazy that you're telling us that money is speech. We got to do what people before us have done to educate, to agitate, to organize, and build a mass movement of people who are making demands for the systemic social change we so richly deserve and so desperately need in this country. So that's the analysis around Move to Amend, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Daniel Lee and ask him if he would put some concrete ideas around what we've just talked about.